Greetings, dear subscribers, as well as casual viewers. In this issue, we will discuss a complex topic, namely the loss of life in the Russia-Ukraine war. I will tell you about all the existing methods of calculating losses, and we will try to answer the question: how many Russian soldiers have already died in Ukraine? When approaching any topic, the context is important, a set of basic factors and nuances that help to understand the information correctly while avoiding manipulation. So before we get into the loss data, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes building that context. Imagine the simplest basic information. For example, someone tells you that they bought a bottle of water for $2. This information is without context, it means nothing more than what has been said. However, if you gradually add new layers to this information, the attitude towards it will change. Let's say someone bought the exact same bottle of water, but for 50 cents. We begin to think that it is possible that the person who spent $2 was the victim of a scam. But this is not the case. A bottle of water for 50 cents was bought in a supermarket, and it cost $2 on a cruise ship. The value of the same item will differ, but at the same time it will no longer arouse any suspicion. This is called objective information analysis. When we evaluate data in its entirety, taking into account the context, manipulations, in turn, consist in removing certain layers to give the information the appearance desired by the client. Such information is easier to perceive, therefore it is easier for the general public to assimilate, and therefore is a favorite tool of any propaganda. I can give the numbers of Russian losses right now, but as in the case of a bottle of water, this will not give us anything. It will be information without context. Therefore, we need to give this very context, hang all the necessary layers so that the named figure has real weight. Why do they start wars? To put it simply, the aggressor starts hostilities in order to get something that he did not have before the war. No one would refuse to receive something. However, nothing is free. You have to pay for everything. Human losses are the price. And the price can vary. Acceptable, too expensive, or prohibitively expensive. It depends on what was bought for it. This is the context. We need to find out what Russia wanted to get out of this war. In fact, this is a very simple question. We know exactly what Russia wanted from this war and what it still wants. Putin said this bluntly in his promotional speech on the eve of the invasion, at the moment of his confidence in victory, the highest point of his strength. It is those goals voiced then that should be considered the only true and relevant for today. You have heard them. Denazification and demilitarization. The complete destruction of Ukrainian statehood along with the people. Why does he need this? This is a question for experts in geopolitics and psychiatry. I don't understand this. But I understand military affairs and psychology. Then, this dude, for the first and last time in the entire war, declared, thought and wanted the same thing. The objectives of the invasion are clear. What price can be paid? Of course, war is not about market relations. Here the approach to pricing is different. The government and the people decide what price they are willing to pay in each case. It all depends on the tasks. The Russian government believes that achieving the goals of the war justifies any number of losses. This is confirmed by the fact that the war that began in 2022 is still going on. In their understanding, the end justifies the means. In Russian society, no one allowed the thought of heavy losses in the war with Ukraine. How then to form an acceptable figure of losses if society refuses to believe in losses in principle? No how. And this is the biggest problem of Russian society at the moment, which unties the hands of the government. We understand the objectives of the invasion, that there is no clearly defined price that the Russians are willing to pay to achieve it. But we do not need it. War is a universal language. The laws of war were spelled out thousands of years ago. We will deal with this question without them. To do this, we need to compare the declared tasks with those achieved. Has Russia achieved its declared tasks? If you are a pro-Russian, then you think that yes, it has achieved. Your belief in your idea is identical to religious fanaticism. This is when faith exists on its own, without requiring proof. It is impossible to communicate with you seriously. However, if you are not a pro-Russian, then you understand that none of the declared goals of the war have been achieved. Denazification. Zelensky is still president. The Ukrainian flag flies in all regional centers of the state. The Azov movement has grown stronger and replenished with new brigades. Demilitarization. Who could have imagined that in 2025 the Ukrainian army would not only exist but also ride Leopards and fly F-16s? The invasion, designed to destroy the Ukrainian army, contributed to its strengthening. A long analysis is not required. Everything lies on the surface. Defense of Donbass. Donbass lies in ruins, it is destroyed, it no longer exists. And it was the Russian army that destroyed it. I can list it for a long time, but you already understand everything. But this video is not about that. The main achievements of the Russian army during the 3 years of war are 12% of the territory of Ukraine. How much this is on the scale of Russia? 0.4%. And the Ukrainian territory has been destroyed. A devastated land, the remaining population on which is economically passive. Mostly pensioners. Was there a lack of territories and pensioners in Russia? I don't think so. However, no other acquisitions are observed. And what price was paid for this? It's time to answer this question. The situation is paradoxical. The losses of the Russian army are of interest to everyone except for the Russians. In Russia, there are no projects that count losses. But there are many such projects outside of it. Casualty data is collected by volunteer teams. They work on the basis of obituaries, reports of the death of soldiers posted on social networks. This is part of OSINT intelligence, which I have talked about many times. One of these projects is dedicated to the killed Russian officers. I am writing this text on June 14, 2025, and on this day the project has counted 6,350 obituaries of Russian officers. Statistics on your screens. On Twitter, the numbers are easily traced. Each is provided with a screenshot or a link. There you can find publications about memorials to those who died. This one, located in Kursk, contains more than 1,000 names of dead local residents. Of these, 105 names are Afghanistan and 994 are Ukraine. Go to the project page and look through it. Many interesting publications there. Link in the description. Soldiers' obituaries are much more difficult to find and count. However, there is a project that deals with this. It is called Goryushko and is in Telegram. The principle of counting is the same. Under each name there is a link. On the 14th of June, more than 114,000 soldiers were counted. Thus, we can name the first confirmed figure of Russian losses, 120,668 dead soldiers and officers on June 14, 2025. This calculation, I recall, is based on obituaries found by volunteers on the Russian internet. What are the main disadvantages of this method? There are doubts about how many % of Russian soldiers receive obituaries. Many of them have no families or have been drafted from prisons. There is no one to write about them. Secondly, obituaries are not written for those who are missing in action. And volunteers are not able to find all the obituaries. There is another drawback. Obituaries are also not written about severely wounded soldiers who cannot return to the front due to amputations and other serious injuries. I was a little disingenuous when I said that there are no Russian projects to calculate losses. Medusa counted 25,218 dead soldiers in 2023 based on studies of cemeteries in Russian cities. Opposition Russian channels ran around with these figures for a long time, unwilling to admit high losses. However, the study itself says that it is based on an analysis of cemeteries in 65 Russian settlements. How many settlements are there in Russia? More than 150,000. Draw conclusions about this study. Volunteer projects are not enough to conduct comprehensive research. This is where more solid teams with good funding, such as the Center for Strategic Studies, come in. Most recently, the center's specialists published their study. The document is a collection of interesting facts, references, graphs, conclusions. I strongly advise you to read it yourself through the link in the description. Here I will indicate the basic theses. The Russian army lost at least 250,000 soldiers dead and 700,000 wounded. The figure includes data from individual projects as well as the excess mortality in Russia, comparison with the figure of payments to the families of the victims. The document indicates several very important points. For example, it is indicated that in a year and a half of the war, the Russian army conquered about 5,000 square kilometers of Ukraine, which is less than 1% of its territory. At the operational level, the advance of the Russian army is frighteningly low in some places. For example, the offensive in the Kupiansk direction, which began in November 2024, over the next 5 months brought an advance of a maximum of 8 kilometers, that is, 50 meters per day. This is even less than the Anglo-British offensive on the Somme River in World War I, when Allied troops advanced 80 meters a day. If we compare Russian losses in Ukraine with the wars in Chechnya or Afghanistan, the figure turns out to be 10 and 15 times higher, respectively. The main reason for the high losses is the mass destruction of Russian armored vehicles. The Oryx project has counted more than 22,000 units. A transition to the infantry offensives took place. The Russian so-called reconnaissance in combat is noted. This is when small infantry units are sent to Ukrainian positions in order to identify enemy firing points. With a high probability, these infantry die without achieving any results. A graph of losses on your screens. It confirms the conclusions of the study that with a decrease in the number of armored vehicles, the number of human losses increases. The study does not take into account losses among mercenaries and conscripts from the occupied areas of Ukraine and does not take into account the missing. There is also a figure of losses of the Ukrainian army. How many Russian soldiers are missing? There is a volunteer project that can give an answer to this question. It is called I Want to Find. The project accepts applications from families of Russian military. I don't know how many such families apply to this project. How objective it is, I can't say either. But there are more than 100,000 applications. And this is a lot in any case. As a bonus, I will tell you about several interesting OSINT accounts that exist on the network. For example, this account counts Russian soldiers who committed suicide with video confirmation. There are already more than 300 of them. Another interesting OSINT analyst named Andrew Perpetua. He often changes the objects of research. One of his latest studies is the number of drone videos that Ukrainian soldiers publish. He believes that at least 85,000 such videos appear every year. If you have been watching me for a long time, you have noticed that I build my video sequence mainly on such videos. What about Ukraine? Ukraine suffers losses, but the calculation of its price is built differently. Unfortunately, Ukraine is a victim of aggression that did not need this war and from which it will not get anything. Its goal is to preserve what was: independence, state and people. In such a war, the same price will be both acceptable and inadequate. After all, for someone who did not want war, the death of even one soldier will be too heavy. Such is the tragedy of humanity today. A victim, by definition, cannot come out of a war with more than he loses, but can be considered a winner simply because he survives. It's time to sum up. Now that you realize that the figure of 120,000 soldiers killed is the lowest possible, do you think that the results of the war are such that they correspond to the number of casualties? As for me, even this figure is already prohibitively high. No Ukrainian territories are worth so many killed able-bodied Russian men. But 120,000 is the minimum. In fact, we mean 250,000 soldiers, not counting the seriously wounded, the missing, and those who died of diseases. Compare this figure with what Russia received in return and draw a conclusion about the success of this war.
Thank you for your son, for raising such a person. This is from the administration, from the entrepreneur Trukanovich. This is advisor to the head of the administration. An entrepreneur and investor. He is just a patriot of his city, and it is very painful to perceive such things. This is a gift from all of us to you as the father of the deceased soldier. Thank you for the son. If the administration can support you, come at any time. I know Dennis is in contact with everyone here. Any information transmitted through him will reach me. Happy upcoming holiday. Happy Day of Russia. Thank you for the son. God bless you.